They said it all happened on a scorching Lagos afternoon when 29-year-old Charles packed his life into a battered gonna-must-go bag and left the chaos of Victoria Island behind. He didn't look back at the upscale barbershop where his boss treated him like dirt, not at his girlfriend Ruth who betrayed him with his best friend, and definitely not at the so-called friends who only remembered him when they needed free haircuts. "Lagos is not for me, and I'm never coming back," Charles muttered to himself with renewed determination. He had heard about a peaceful riverside community called Akamu Village, where life was cheap and quiet. What nobody told him was that this community harbored a dark secret beneath its calm waters, and peace always came at a terrible price. 2 weeks after arriving in the village, Charles began searching for ways to restart his barbering business. He worked odd jobs, selling phone cards by the roadside, helping at the local mechanic shop, even washing clothes for neighbors. After saving enough money, he was ready to open his salon, but the available shops were far beyond his meager budget of 30,000 naira. One evening, his new friend James mentioned an abandoned building by the riverside. "It's been empty for 15 years, James said nervously. "Nobody goes near that place." Charles's eyes lit up. Finally, God has answered my prayers. The next morning, Charles headed straight to the building. When he pushed open the creaky door, his heart soared despite the dust, cobwebs, and rusty equipment scattered everywhere. He immediately began cleaning, and within hours, the place was transformed. He bought second-hand barbering equipment from the market, and within 2 weeks, Charles's cut palace was ready for business. The villagers watched in silent horror as Charles opened his salon in the cursed building. He noticed their strange stares but dismissed them as village superstition. He was confident customers would flock to his shop since it offered a perfect view of the peaceful river. But months passed, and not a single customer entered his salon. Every day, Charles would sit outside, waving at passers-by, hoping they would stop by. But they all hurried past, avoiding eye contact. "What's wrong with me? Am I cursed?" Charles asked James desperately. "Why won't anyone come to my salon?" James shifted uncomfortably. "Maybe it's the location, my friend. That building has a history." "What kind of history?" Charles demanded, but James quickly changed the subject and hurried away. Charles was too stubborn to listen to village gossip. He believed in hard work and second chances, not in curses and superstitions. But as weeks turned into months without a single customer, desperation began to creep in. Some days, he would dissolve a single Maggi cube in hot water just to feel something in his stomach. On his worst days, he would soak stale bread in river water and pretend it was a feast. The villagers whispered that no business ever survived near the river, that the water itself was cursed. But Charles refused to believe such nonsense. He had invested everything in this dream, and he wouldn't give up now. One evening, as Charles sat outside his empty salon watching the sunset reflect on the calm river, old Nana approached him. Nana was the village's elderly woman who sold roasted corn and was known for her prophetic warnings. "My son," she said gently, "I've been watching you struggle. That building you've chosen, it holds memories that should remain buried. Mama Nana, I respect you, but I don't believe in all these village stories. I just need customers, nothing more." Nana's weathered face creased with worry. "When God blesses, it comes slowly but surely. When the river blesses, it drowns you in gifts first, then pulls you under." She paused, looking directly into his eyes. "Be careful what you wish for, Charles." That night, as Charles lay on his thin mattress in the back room of his salon, he stared at the ceiling and wondered if he had made a terrible mistake. The sound of the river flowing seemed louder than usual, almost like whispers in a language he couldn't understand. A thunderstorm was brewing outside, and the first drops of rain began pattering against his window. Charles pulled his thin blanket closer and tried to sleep, But something felt different about this night. The air was thick with an energy that made his skin prickle with unease. As the storm intensified, Charles thought he heard footsteps on the wet ground outside his salon. But that was impossible. Nobody ever came to this area, especially not at night during a storm. Then came the knock on his door. The knock wasn't loud or urgent. It was soft, almost gentle, like fingertips tapping on wood. Charles's heart began racing. It was past midnight, and in all his months at the salon, no one had ever visited him, let alone at this ungodly hour. The knocking persisted, patient but insistent. Charles crossed himself 3 times and whispered a quick prayer before tiptoeing to the door. His hand trembled as he slowly opened it, and what he saw made his breath catch in his throat. A woman stood before him, completely soaked from the rain. Her dark skin glistened with water, and her long hair clung to her shoulders, dripping steadily onto the ground. She was barefoot, and there was something otherworldly about her presence. Beautiful, but in a way that made Charles feel deeply uneasy. Without waiting for an invitation, the woman walked past him into the salon and sat in one of his barber chairs as if she owned the place. Charles stood frozen by the door, rain still falling behind him. "Good evening," Charles managed to stammer. How can I help you?" The woman smiled, and when she spoke, her voice was like water flowing over smooth stones. "My name is Adunni, and I have come to make you wealthy beyond your dreams." "I don't understand. Where did you come from? How did you get here in this storm?" "I have seen your struggles, Charles. Your silent prayers and desperate wishes have reached my ears. I want to help you." Charles felt his legs weaken. "Help me how? Are you real?" Adunni reached into what appeared to be a leather pouch that Charles hadn't noticed before. She pulled out a set of golden clippers that seemed to glow with their own inner light. "These are not ordinary clippers," she said, placing them on the counter. "Any man whose hair you cut with these will experience a transformation. Success, wealth, power. Everything they've ever desired will come to them. And for every life you change, you will be richly rewarded." Charles stared at the clippers, mesmerized. They were unlike anything he'd ever seen, crafted with intricate designs that seemed to move in the dim light. "What do you want in return?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Adunni stood gracefully. "Just use them. When the time comes, you'll know what I require." Before Charles could ask another question, Adunni walked toward the door. He rushed after her, but she was already stepping into the river in front of his salon. The water welcomed her like an old friend, and within moments she disappeared beneath the surface, leaving only ripples behind. Charles stood in the rain, staring at the spot where she had vanished. When he finally went back inside, the golden clippers sat on his counter, gleaming as if they had always belonged there. The next morning, Charles woke up wondering if it had all been a dream. But there were the clippers, real and solid, their golden surface warm to the touch. As he examined them, he noticed strange symbols etched into the metal. Symbols that seemed to shift and dance when he wasn't looking directly at them. While he was still contemplating what had happened, someone knocked on his door. Charles nearly jumped out of his skin, but this time it was a young man named Elon, a struggling mechanic from the village. "Brother Charles," Elon said hesitantly, "I know people say your shop is different, but I need a haircut badly. I have a job interview tomorrow with a big oil company in Lagos. It's my only chance to escape poverty." Charles's hands trembled as he picked up the golden clippers. "Sit down, my friend. I'll give you the best haircut of your life." As soon as the clippers touched Elon's hair, something magical happened. The blades moved through his hair like they were guided by an invisible hand. Charles found himself cutting with a skill and precision he'd never possessed before. The clippers seemed to know exactly what they were doing. When Charles finished, Elon looked into the mirror and gasped. His reflection showed not just a perfectly groomed man, but someone who radiated confidence and authority. Even his posture had changed. He sat straighter, his eyes brighter. "Brother Charles, feel different. I feel like I can conquer the world." Elon paid Charles and left, practically floating with newfound confidence. That evening, Charles received a call that would change everything. "Charles." Elon's voice was ecstatic on the phone. "I got the job. Not only did I get it, but they offered me double the salary I asked for. They said I had an aura of success about me. Whatever you did to my hair, it worked a miracle." Word spread through the village like wildfire. Within days, men were lining up outside Charles's salon, all wanting the haircut that had transformed Elon from a struggling mechanic into a successful oil company executive. Charles was overwhelmed but thrilled. He used the golden clippers on every customer, and each time the results were extraordinary. Justin, a failed student, got a haircut and suddenly passed all his previously failed exams, earning a scholarship to study abroad. Chris, who had been unemployed for 3 years, walked out of the salon and received a job offer within hours. But the most remarkable transformation was John, a quiet fisherman who had been trying to propose to his girlfriend for months but couldn't afford a ring. After Charles cut his hair, John found a bag of rare pearls in his fishing net the very next day. Enough to buy not just a ring but a house. Charles was making more money than he'd ever imagined. His simple salon became the most talked-about place in the entire state. Men traveled from Lagos, Abuja, and beyond, all seeking the miracle haircut that Charles provided. The transformation wasn't just in his customers. Charles himself began to change. He bought new equipment, renovated the entire building, and even hired assistants. His previously empty salon was now booked solid for months in advance. Social media exploded with testimonials. #CharlesCutPalace became a trending topic. Influencers called him the miracle barber, and news stations wanted interviews. Charles had achieved everything he'd ever dreamed of and more. But late at night, when the salon was empty and the river was quiet, Charles would examine the golden clippers with growing unease. They never seemed to get dull, never needed maintenance, and sometimes he could swear he heard them whispering in that same unknown language he'd heard in the river's flow. Nana, the old corn seller, watched everything with growing concern. Her goats, which used to graze peacefully near the river, now refused to go anywhere near Charles's salon. They would pull against their ropes and bleat in distress whenever she tried to lead them past the building. One morning she approached Charles. "My son, I'm happy for your success, but something is not right. My animals sense it, and my dreams are filled with dark waters." Charles brushed off her concerns with a confident smile. "Mama Nana, business is just good finally. God has blessed me." But inside, his stomach churned with a fear he couldn't name. 3 months after that first mysterious night, Charles had become wealthy beyond his wildest dreams. His salon was featured in magazines, and celebrities were flying in from across Africa just to experience his legendary haircuts. He had moved from the back room of the salon to a luxurious apartment in the village, complete with a generator, satellite TV, and all the comforts he'd never imagined he could afford. But success came with a cost Charles was only beginning to understand. Started with the dreams. Every night, Charles would see men with no faces sitting in underwater barber chairs, their hair flowing like seaweed while he cut it with scissors made of fish bones. They would open their mouths as if screaming, but only bubbles would emerge. He would wake up drenched in sweat, the taste of river water in his mouth. Then came the physical changes. Charles noticed that his hands had begun to tingle whenever he touched the golden clippers. His reflection in the salon mirrors sometimes seemed to ripple, as if he were looking at himself through water rather than glass. One evening, as Charles was closing the salon after another busy day, he found a young man named James waiting outside in the rain. But this wasn't his friend James from the village. This was a stranger, barely 18, with desperate eyes and torn clothes. "Please, sir," the young man begged. "I need your help. My mother is dying and I need money for her hospital bill. Everyone says you can change lives with your clippers." Charles felt a stab of sympathy. "Come in, son. I'll take care of you." As Charles began cutting the young man's hair with the golden clippers, something felt different. The clippers grew hot in his hands, almost burning his palms. The young man's hair fell to the floor, but instead of the usual black strands, Charles saw what looked like tiny silver fish swimming in the hair before dissolving into nothing. When Charles finished, the young man looked in the mirror and smiled with joy. "I feel amazing. Thank you, sir." But as the young man left, Charles noticed something that made his blood run cold. In the mirror's reflection, he had seen not the young man's face, but the face of a fish, scales, gills, and all. That night, Charles tried to sleep but couldn't shake the image from his mind. Around midnight, he heard the familiar soft knocking at his door. A dunny had returned. "You've done well, Charles," a dunny said as she entered the salon, her hair still dripping with river water. "Your fame has spread far beyond this village. Men speak of you with reverence and fear." "I've been having strange dreams," Charles said, his voice shaking. "And today, I saw something in the mirror that wasn't human. What's happening to me?" A dunny smiled, but there was something cold in her expression now. "You're becoming what you were always meant to be. The river has chosen you, just as it chose your predecessor." "My predecessor. The man who owned this salon before you. His name was Samuel. He too was a barber who struggled until I offered him the same gift. For 15 years he served the river well, transforming men's lives and growing wealthy beyond measure." Charles felt his legs weaken. What happened to him? When his time came, he returned to the river, as all servants must. His body was never found, but his spirit lives on in these waters, helping to power the magic that flows through those clippers. "You're saying he's dead?" "He's become part of something greater. And soon you will too." Charles backed away from her, terror filling his chest. "No, I won't. I'll destroy the clippers, I'll close the salon." A dunny's laugh was like water cascading over rocks. "You cannot destroy what belongs to the river. And you cannot close what was never truly yours to begin with." She gestured toward the window, and Charles looked out to see the river glowing with an eerie blue light. In the water, he could make out shapes moving beneath the surface. The forms of men in barber chairs, their hair flowing like underwater plants. "Every man whose hair you've cut with those clippers has given a piece of his soul to the river," a dunny explained. "And with each cut, you've grown more connected to us. Soon the transformation will be complete." Charles felt a sudden wetness on his face and touched his cheek. His fingers came away with gills that were slowly opening and closing. "How long do I have?" he whispered. "1 more month. Use that time to prepare your replacement. The river is patient, but it always collects what it's owed." A dunny turned and walked back toward the door. "Oh, and Charles, don't even think about running. The river flows everywhere, and we will find you." After a dunny disappeared back into the river, Charles spent the entire night pacing his salon in panic. The gills on his neck were becoming more pronounced, and when he looked in the mirror, his eyes had developed a strange, fish-like quality that made him look away in horror. By morning, Charles had made his decision. He would run. He packed everything he could carry and closed the salon, putting up a sign that said, "Temporarily closed for family emergency." But as he tried to leave the village, something strange happened. Every road he took led him back to the river. Every bus he boarded would mysteriously break down near the water. It was as if the village itself was refusing to let him go. Desperate, Charles sought out Nana, the old woman who had warned him from the beginning. "Mama Nana, I need your help," he pleaded, showing her the gills that were now clearly visible on his neck. "You were right about everything. The river, the curse, all of it." Nana looked at him with sad but knowing eyes. "I've seen this before, my son. 40 years ago, there was another barber named Samuel. He too thought he could outwit the river spirits. What happened to him? He fought them for months, but in the end, the river always wins. However," she paused, "there might be one way." Charles grabbed her hands desperately. "Tell me. You must find someone willing to take your place voluntarily. Someone who will accept the clippers knowing the full truth of what they are. Only then will the river release you." "But who would agree to such a thing?" Nana's expression grew grave. "Someone desperate enough to make the same bargain you once made." That evening, Charles reopened his salon with a heavy heart. He knew what he had to do, but the thought of condemning another person to his fate filled him with self-loathing. Yet, as the gills on his neck grew larger and his breathing became more labored on dry land, he realized he was running out of time. 3 days later, a young man named David arrived at the salon. He was thin, desperate, and had the same hungry look in his eyes that Charles had once possessed. "I heard you can change lives," David said hopefully. "I'm willing to pay anything. I need a miracle." Charles stared at the young man, the golden clippers heavy in his hands. Knowing he was about to make the most difficult decision of his life, Charles stared at David, seeing his own desperate past reflected in the young man's eyes. David was probably 25, with calloused hands that spoke of hard labor and clothes that had seen better days. "I lost my job 3 months ago," David explained, sitting in the barber chair. "My wife left me, took our daughter with her. Have nothing left. People say you can work miracles with your clippers." Charles's hands trembled as he picked up the golden clippers. This was his chance to escape, but it meant condemning this innocent man to the same fate he was trying to avoid. "David," Charles said slowly, "what if I told you that this haircut comes with a price? A price that might be more than you're willing to pay?" David laughed bitterly. "Brother, I've already lost everything. What more could I possibly lose?" Charles wanted to tell him the truth, but the gills on his neck were making it harder to breathe. He could feel the river calling to him, pulling at his soul with every passing moment. In his peripheral vision, he could see a dunny standing by the window, watching him with those ancient, knowing eyes. "The clippers will change your life," Charles continued, "but they will also change you, in ways you can't imagine." "I don't care," David said firmly. "I need this chance." Charles closed his eyes and made his choice. He began cutting David's hair with the regular clippers, not the golden ones. When he finished, David looked disappointed. "Is that it? I don't feel any different." "David, listen to me carefully," Charles said, his voice urgent. "There's something you need to know about this place, about these clippers." But before he could finish, a dunny appeared inside the salon, her presence filling the room with the smell of river water and decay. "Charles," she said, her voice carrying the weight of centuries, "you have made your choice. If you will not willingly transfer the burden, then you will fulfill your obligation tonight." David looked confused, glancing between Charles and the mysterious woman who had appeared from nowhere. "Who is she? What's going on?" David asked. Charles felt his legs giving way as his transformation accelerated. "Run," he gasped to David. "Run and never come back to this place." But it was too late. The river had claimed him, and Charles felt himself being pulled toward the water that had been calling his name for months. David watched in horror as Charles stumbled toward the river, his skin taking on a scaly, iridescent quality. The man who had just cut his hair was transforming before his eyes into something that belonged more in the water than on land. "Charles!" David shouted, but Charles was already waist-deep in the river, his gills opening and closing as he adapted to his new environment. Adunni turned to David with a smile that was both beautiful and terrifying. Do not fear for him. He has simply returned to where he belongs. The river gives life, and the river takes life. It is the natural order. What are you? David whispered, backing toward the door. I am the keeper of the river's gifts. For generations, I have watched over this place, ensuring that the balance is maintained. Charles served his purpose well, but every servant must eventually join the waters that gave them power. David's eyes fell on the golden clippers, which were now glowing brighter than ever. Those clippers. They're cursed, aren't they? They are blessed, Adunni corrected. They carry the power to transform lives, to give men everything they've ever dreamed of. But power always comes with a price. David looked out at the river, where Charles had completely disappeared beneath the surface. Strangely, he felt no fear, only a deep sense of understanding. His life had been falling apart for months, and he had come here as a last resort. If I take the clippers, David said slowly, I'll have the same fate as Charles. You will have years of wealth, success, and the power to change lives. You will be revered and feared. Men will travel from across the continent to seek your services. Is that not worth the price? David picked up the golden clippers, feeling their warmth pulse through his hands. In his mind, he could see visions of success, of his wife returning to him, of his daughter looking at him with pride instead of disappointment. How long do I have? He asked. The river is generous to those who serve it well. You will have as long as Charles had. Perhaps longer if you embrace your role willingly. David looked one last time at the river where Charles had vanished, then back at the clippers in his hands. When do I start? He asked. And so the cycle began again, as it had for generations, as it always would, by the river that never forgot to collect its debts. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a powerful story of resilience and wisdom from our community.